Your mouth is your worst enemy, and you don't even know it. This isn't because talking is inherently bad, or because being silent is somehow better. Instead, it's because in any situation where there's a power structure, negotiation, or even just a simple interaction between people, the things you say can be used against you. We're often told that being upfront builds trust. You hear it in business seminars, relationship advice, and repeated by psychologists who say a team needs openness to feel secure. But if you look at the people who climb the ladder, survive job cuts, and keep the upper hand in disagreements, something doesn't add up. Being open is praised, but being careful is often what gets rewarded. I notice this in everyday situations. Imagine a worker who goes into too much detail about why a project is behind schedule, listing every problem and communication breakdown. They might think they're showing just how responsible they are. The issue is that other people might not see it that way. The manager now knows where to apply pressure, and coworkers have spotted a weakness they can take advantage of. That person didn't need to give out this info, but they did. Back in 1971, a psychologist named Sidney Jurard wrote that telling people things about yourself makes you closer. This idea spread into modern culture. We share personal stories to bond, explain ourselves to be understood, and open to be liked. But Jurard's research was done in controlled settings, where people shared things equally. That situation doesn't always happen in the real world. One person talks, and the other takes note. Machiavelli knew this without needing to do experiments. In his book, The Prince, he said leaders need to know how to be bad, if it is required, and that it isn't smart to keep promises if they hurt you. People use this quote to say that Machiavelli was cruel, but that is not necessarily the case. He was pointing out how predictable people can be. If others know what to expect from you, they can use it against you. Talking too much can feel powerful because saying things makes you feel in control. You're telling your story, filling silences, and getting your view out there first. In negotiations, this happens almost automatically. I've seen company owners tell investors their limits before anyone even asks. They say things like, "We're flexible on how much the company is worth," or "We're okay with you having some control." They think sounding flexible makes them seem easier to work with. The issue is that they're actually lowering their price. In 2002, some work by economist Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky changed how people negotiate, discussing the idea that the first number offered affects everything that follows. Knowing this, people still say numbers too early because they don't like awkward silences. That discomfort is what pushes them to talk. Silence seems like losing control, so they talk to get it back, giving out data that shapes the whole negotiation. Even in relationships, it's the same thing. One person gets nervous after a small argument and sends a long message explaining their feelings and going over old issues. They think they're being mature and honest, but they're also revealing their fear of being left alone. The other partner holds insight. It's not because they planned it that way, but because they were patient. Here's where common ideas start to fall apart. Some psychologists advocate for being okay with weakness. But power isn't a support group. It's a place where people are competing. Showing weakness isn't about getting closer, it's giving out data. Watch who's quick to correct others in public. The employee who has to fix a tiny detail in a presentation is showing a need to be recognized. They're showing they care about their position. Studies on chimpanzees have found that ones lower in the group get more worked up when food is given out, while the higher-ranking ones save their energy. They don't need to show everyone their presence. It's already known. People are more complicated, but the idea is the same. I once saw a senior manager during a crisis meeting. People were pointing fingers, and the numbers weren't clear. Several department heads quickly tried to defend themselves, giving one explanation after another. The manager didn't say much. He asked a couple of short questions and then stopped. People started talking to fill the silence, revealing their timetables and doubt. He left knowing more than anyone else without giving away his hand. Later, he knew where to expect problems. The truth is that talking too much makes your thinking known. The more you express your plans, the harder it is to change course. If you declare that you're loyal to the cause, later changing sides looks like betrayal. If you openly acknowledge your goals, any failure becomes embarrassing. If you speak your worries, they become something someone can exploit. Machiavelli suggested that a leader should seem kind, faithful, humane, fair, and religious, but be ready to act against these qualities if required. Appearing a certain way involves language, while successful planning involves keeping quiet. The paradox is clear. You have to say enough to present a good image, but never enough that people can predict what you'll do. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people don't fail because they aren't intelligent or skilled. They fail because when they're worried, proud, or trying to get approval, they reveal what they're thinking. They explain why they deserve something. They complain about being treated unfairly. They tell the wrong people their long-term plans. Every sentence feels like it's giving them power, but it's actually limiting their options. I was surprised by how predictable this is. When you talk under pressure, you show that you're under pressure. If you defend yourself too quickly, you show that the accusation bothers you. If you explain too much, you suggest you're not completely confident. If this happens, the quiet observer gains leverage simply by not talking. We like to think our words show who we are. In power situations, they show our plans. And once that's out, it is possible to be countered. If this is accurate, it means that effective communication is not about being eloquent, but about holding back. Not persuasion, but concealing your intentions. This leads to a disturbing question. In your surroundings, who's listening now to understand you, but to chart you? If speech exposes position, then the real vulnerability is not talkativeness, is the need to be understood. That need looks innocent, even noble. From early attachment research in the 1960s, John Bowlby showed that a child's survival depends on responsiveness from a caregiver. Mary Ainsworth's strange situation experiments that when connection feels threatened, the child intensifies signaling, crying louder, clinging harder, amplifying expression. The nervous system equates being understood with being safe. The formula is primitive: signal distress, receive attunement, restore equilibrium. That wiring does not disappear in adulthood. It simply becomes verbal. In 2010, researchers at Harvard led by Diana Tamir and Jason Mitchell found that self-disclosure activates the brain's reward circuitry, the same dopaminergic regions associated with food and money. Participants were even willing to forego small financial rewards just to talk about themselves. I remember reading that study and pausing. This is not poetry. This is reinforcement learning. When you explain yourself and someone listens, your brain pays you. So when a colleague misunderstands your email and you write a long clarification, it does not just feel rational. It feels regulating. When a partner seems distant and you send a detailed message about your intentions, it feels like you're regaining control. When your manager questions your decision and you outline every step you took, you experience relief. You have reduced ambiguity. You have told your side. But here the official theory begins to crack, because the relief you feel is internal. The consequences are external. I once observed a product manager in a large technology firm after a tense meeting about missed deadlines. Instead of waiting, she scheduled follow-up conversations with 3 different stakeholders to make sure everyone understood her reasoning. In each conversation, she revealed slightly different emotional cues: frustration with engineering, disappointment in marketing, concern about leadership expectations. She thought she was building alignment. Within 2 weeks, those fragments returned to her reframed. Engineering now knew she blamed them. Marketing sensed her doubt. Leadership recognized her anxiety about visibility. Her attempt to be understood distributed her psychological map across the organization. This mechanism rarely gets named out loud. Explanation feels like agency. In reality, it is disclosure. Anxiety amplifies it. In 1994, James Gross began publishing work on emotion regulation, showing that when arousal rises, cognitive control narrows. Under stress, we default to habits that previously reduced discomfort. For many people with anxious attachment patterns, documented extensively by Cindy Hazan and Philip Shaver in the 1980s, that habit is overcommunication. Clarify more. Text again. Add context. Remove any possibility of misinterpretation. The impulse is not strategic. It is soothing. Now, consider how easily this can be exploited. Silence is the simplest trigger. A delayed response to a proposal. A neutral face in a meeting. A pause after you make a point. In interrogation research, including work by Saul Kassin on false confessions, prolonged silence increases the subject's discomfort and likelihood of elaboration. People start filling the void. They supply details that were never requested. I have watched executives use this deliberately. One investor I encountered rarely responded immediately to pitch decks. Founders, interpreting the delay as doubt, would send supplementary explanations. Market risks they had not previously disclosed, internal tensions, revised projections. He gathered intelligence without asking a single direct question. Then there's the calibrated prompt. Why do you think that? It sounds curious, open-minded, but it shifts the burden of justification onto you. Social reciprocity bias, described by Robert Cialdini in the 1980s, tells us that when someone appears interested, we feel compelled to provide value in return. You interpret the question as engagement. So you expand. You reveal assumptions, fears, long-term intentions. Artificial vulnerability works even better. In sales training programs across multinational corporations, representatives are taught to disclose a minor personal weakness early in the interaction. It lowers defenses. The other person reciprocates with something slightly deeper. What feels like bonding is often sequencing. First, I reveal something harmless. Then you reveal something strategic. Social media industrialized this dynamic. Platforms like Facebook and Instagram, especially after the introduction of algorithmic engagement ranking around 2009 and 2010, rewarded emotional disclosure with visibility. The more personal the post, the more interaction. Dopamine again. You learned that revelation equals validation. But you also create a permanent archive of your triggers, loyalties, grievances. Employers screen it. Political campaigns mine it. Advertisers profile it. The architecture of validation doubles as the architecture of surveillance. Machiavelli did not have fMRI scanners or engagement metrics, but he understood asymmetry. A ruler, he wrote, must conceal intention and appear otherwise, not because deception is glamorous, but because predictability is dangerous. If others can anticipate your reactions, they can design around them. If they know what reassures you, they can ration it. If they know what provokes you, they can deploy it. I did not expect how automatic the need to be understood is. A delayed reply from someone important can distort your day. You replay your last message. You draft clarifications that no one requested. In that moment, the threat is not rejection. It is ambiguity. An explanation feels like the cure. But explanation also sketches the blueprint of your internal world. In corporate disputes, in divorces, in political rivalries, the party that speaks more first often believes they are shaping the narrative. Sometimes they are. More often, they're narrowing their range of movement. Each clarification reduces ambiguity. Each justification fixes motive. Each emotional aside provides leverage. Validation is a biological reward. Strategic ambiguity is a political asset. They rarely coexist comfortably. And here lies the tension that most leadership seminars avoid. The more urgently you need to be understood, the easier you are to model. The easier you are to model, the easier you are to predict. And the more you explain, the more predictable you become. If the more you explain, the more predictable you become, then every conversation is not just an exchange of information. It is a ranking ritual. I began paying attention to who speaks the most in meetings. Not who has the best ideas. Not who is formally in charge. Simply who occupies the air. In 2015, a study published in the journal Social Psychological and Personality Science examined speaking time in group discussions and found that perceived status strongly predicted how long a person spoke, but not always in the way people expect. High-status individuals did speak confidently, but they did not necessarily speak the longest. Lower-status participants, especially those uncertain about their standing, tended to over-contribute in an attempt to secure visibility. I have seen this pattern inside multinational corporations. During quarterly reviews, mid-level managers often dominate the presentation phase, flooding slides with context, preemptively answering objections. They think they are demonstrating competence. Meanwhile, senior executives interrupt selectively, ask 2 or 3 framing questions, and then fall silent. The executives do not compete for airtime. They compete for definition. Whoever defines the problem defines the hierarchy. Interruptions reveal even more. In the 1970s, researchers Don Zimmerman and Candace West analyzed mixed-gender conversations and documented how interruption patterns correlate with dominance. Later replications extended this beyond gender into organizational status. The higher the rank, the more likely the person is to interrupt without social penalty. But what struck me was not the dominance of interruption. It was the reaction to being interrupted. Those lower in hierarchy tend to apologize for finishing their own sentences. Sorry, just one more point. That apology is not about politeness. It is about perceived rank. Over-justification is another signal. In negotiation research, including work by Adam Galinsky at Northwestern in the early 2000s, high-power individuals were shown to anchor more aggressively and provide fewer concessions. Low-power participants explained their offers extensively. They justified pricing, timelines, even personal constraints. The intention was to appear fair. The effect was to expose boundaries. I once observed a salary negotiation inside a technology startup. The candidate, highly skilled, presented a detailed explanation of why she deserved a certain compensation package. She referenced market averages, her prior achievements, the cost of relocation. The founder listened quietly and responded with a single sentence. That range might be difficult for us right now. No justification. No numbers. The asymmetry was stark. She had laid out her full valuation model. He had revealed nothing about his actual budget ceiling. Days later, the offer came slightly above his initial internal limit, but well below hers. She had negotiated against her own transparency. Speech signals more than argument. It signals neediness. The employee who repeatedly says, "I just want to make sure everyone is aligned," may be expressing collaboration, or they may be signaling fear of exclusion. The manager who says, "To be completely honest," before every critical remark signals insecurity about how the remark will land. Authority rarely announces itself so anxiously. There is research behind this discomfort. In 2007, Cameron Anderson and colleagues at the University of California, Berkeley studied dominance and prestige as two distinct pathways to status. Dominance involves force and control. Prestige involves being respected for competence. But both share one feature: reduced anxiety about approval. Those secure in status monitor others less. Their language reflects it. Fewer disclaimers, fewer hedges, fewer defensive clarifications. Now consider political debates. In televised presidential debates in the United States over the last several decades, analysts have tracked speaking time, interruption frequency, and lexical complexity. Candidates trailing in polls often increase verbosity, attempting to regain narrative control. Leading candidates frequently rely on shorter, declarative statements. They repeat frames rather than elaborate arguments. I did not expect how consistent this was. When you are ahead, you define. When you are behind, you explain. Here is where Machiavelli becomes less caricature and more strategist. He observed that a prince must learn to appear decisive and measured. Appearances are linguistic constructions, but he also warned against unnecessary disclosure of intention. The powerful actor does not rush to justify policy. He announces it as necessity. The justification, if given, is minimal and framed as inevitability. In corporate crises, this pattern intensifies. After the financial collapse of 2008, public statements from major banking executives were scrutinized for tone. Those who issued lengthy emotional apologies were perceived as weaker by markets compared to those who combined brief acknowledgement with forward-looking directives. Investors were not evaluating sincerity alone. They were evaluating stability. Stability is signaled through controlled speech. For ordinary employees, this dynamic feels different. It feels like walking a tightrope. Speak too little and you risk invisibility. Speak too much and you risk exposure. Interrupt and you may appear assertive or insubordinate. Over-justify and you appear insecure. Under-explain and you appear arrogant. The official advice, just be authentic, collapses under structural pressure. Authenticity does not neutralize hierarchy. It reveals your navigation of it. The uncomfortable truth is that speech in hierarchical environments is rarely about content. It is about rank negotiation. Each sentence positions you relative to others. The question is not only what you said, it is how much you needed to say it. I am not arguing for muteness. I am noticing calibration. The individuals who hold durable authority tend to speak less frequently, but shape the frame within which others speak. They set the agenda. They summarize. They conclude. They do not scramble to fill silence. They allow others to reveal their priorities first. And once you start seeing conversations as positioning rather than discussion, it becomes difficult to unsee. Who is asking questions versus who is answering them? Who is defending versus who is evaluating? Who is clarifying motives versus who remains ambiguous? Because if every sentence reveals rank, then the real contest is not over ideas. It is over who must justify themselves and who never does. If every sentence reveals rank, then the most powerful move is not to speak, but to make others speak for you. This is where the dynamic shifts. Up to now, the danger was self-inflicted exposure. But exposure is rarely accidental from the other side. It can be engineered, not through overt pressure, through design. Interrogation psychology has documented this for decades. In the 1950s and 60s, the United States military and later law enforcement agencies refined what became known as the Reed technique. Popular culture portrays interrogation as aggressive confrontation. In reality, many phases rely on rapport building and controlled silence. The interrogator does not always demand information. He creates psychological discomfort and waits. Studies by Saul Kassin and Gisli Gudjonsson in the 1990s demonstrated how suspects, left in silence after partial disclosure, frequently elaborate beyond the initial admission. The silence functions as a vacuum. Humans rush to fill vacuums. Strategic silence in corporate settings operates the same way. I watched a senior partner in a consulting firm review a junior analyst proposal. He read it quietly for almost a full minute. No facial expression, no comment. The analyst began defending sections that had not been criticized. He pointed out alternative models he had considered, internal disagreements within the team, doubts about certain projections. The partner had not asked a single probing question. He had created a pause. Mirroring intensifies this. In 2007, researchers Tanya Chartrand and John Bard published work on the chameleon effect, showing that subtle mimicry increases liking and trust. Sales organizations internalized this long ago. A representative mirrors posture, tempo, vocabulary. The client feels understood. Safety rises. Disclosure follows. I have seen sales calls where the representative adopts the client's skepticism, even repeating mild complaints about industry inefficiencies. The client relaxes. Finally, someone who gets it, and then he reveals budget constraints, internal politics, unspoken deadlines. Encouraged venting is another underestimated tool. In negotiation training programs influenced by the work of Roger Fisher and William Ury in the 1980s, allowing the other party to feel heard is framed as collaborative. And it can be, but venting also produces intelligence. When a manager says to an employee, "Tell me what's frustrating you," it sounds supportive. Yet the content of that frustration maps pressure points, who the employee resents, where loyalty is weak, what incentives might shift behavior. False agreement works even more quietly. A nod, a soft "I understand," not a commitment, not an endorsement, just enough validation to keep the other person talking. Social reciprocity bias again. Robert Cialdini described how small signals of alignment increase compliance. If I appear to share your view, you deepen your explanation. You reveal nuance. You lower defenses. Meanwhile, I remain non-committal. Feigned ignorance is perhaps the most tactic. The need looks innocent, even noble. Way back in the 1960s, John Bowlby's research on attachment showed that a child's ability to survive depends on how well their caregiver responds to them. Mary Ainsworth took this further with her strange situation experiments. She that when a child feels their connection with their caregiver is threatened, they turn up the volume. They cry louder, cling tighter, and generally express themselves more intensely. Essentially, our nervous system equates being understood with being safe. It's a basic formula. Show you're in distress, get attention, and feel secure again. This wiring doesn't just disappear when we grow up, it just becomes verbal. In 2010, researchers at Harvard, led by Diana Tamir and Jason Mitchell, that talking about yourself actually lights up the reward centers in your brain, the same areas that respond to food and money. Study participants were even willing to pass up small amounts of money just for the chance to talk about themselves. When you explain yourself and someone listens, your brain pays you. So, when a coworker misunderstands your email and you fire off a long clarification, it's not just a logical thing to do. It actually feels good. If your partner seems distant and you send a message detailing your intentions, it feels like you're regaining control of the situation. And when your boss questions your decision and you explain every step you took, you experience a genuine sense of relief. But here's where the theory starts to fall apart. The comfort you feel is internal. The end results can be external. A product manager at a tech firm had a tense meeting about missed deadlines. Instead of taking a breath, she scheduled follow-up chats with 3 different people to make sure everyone understood her reasoning. In each conversation, she let slip slightly different emotional cues. Frustration with the engineers, disappointment in the marketing team, concern about what the higher-ups thought. She believed she was building consensus. But within a couple of weeks, those little fragments came back to bite her. The engineers now knew she blamed them. The marketing team sensed her lack of confidence, and leadership recognized her anxiety about whether she was visible enough. Her attempt to be understood ended up giving everyone in the company a map of her vulnerabilities. Explanation feels like taking control when in reality, it's giving yourself away. Anxiety only makes things worse. Back in 1994, James Gross started publishing research on how we regulate our emotions, that when we're stressed, our ability to think clearly goes down. Under pressure, we revert to old habits that have made us feel better in the past. For many people with anxious attachment styles, this habit is overcommunication. Clarify things more. Text again. Provide context. Leave no room for misinterpretation. It's not about having a plan. It's about soothing anxiety. It's easy to see how this could be used to someone's advantage. Silence is an effective trigger. A delayed response to a proposal, a blank look in a meeting, a pause after you make a point. Research and trials have that prolonged silence increases the subject's discomfort and likelihood of explanation. People start trying to fill the void, volunteering details that were never asked for. I've watched managers use this to their benefit. One investor I knew rarely responded quickly to proposals from founders. The founders, interpreting the delay as doubt, would send more explanations, market risks they hadn't mentioned before, internal disagreements, revised financial projections. He gathered all that useful data without asking a thing. Then there's the carefully worded question, why do you think that? It sounds curious and open-minded, but it puts the burden of proof on you. Because of something called social reciprocity, when someone seems interested, we feel like we need to provide something of value in return. You take the question as a sign of engagement. So you go into more detail, revealing your assumptions, fears, and long-term intentions. Pretending to be vulnerable works even better. In sales training programs, representatives are taught to reveal a minor, harmless weakness early on. It lowers people's defenses, and they reciprocate by sharing something a bit deeper. What feels like bonding is actually a carefully planned sequence. First, I reveal something harmless, Then, you reveal something strategic. Social media turned this dynamic into an industry. Platforms like Facebook and Instagram reward emotional expression with visibility. The more personal the post, the more people interact with it. You learn that revealing equals validation. But you're also creating a permanent record of your triggers, loyalties, and complaints. Employers look at this, political campaigns analyze it, and advertisers use it to target you. Machiavelli didn't have access to brain scanners or engagement metrics, but he understood the importance of asymmetry. A leader, he wrote, must hide their intentions and appear to be something else. Not because being deceptive is cool, but because predictability is dangerous. If others can anticipate your reactions, they know how to influence you. If they know what makes you feel secure, they can withhold it and use it against you. That's why the need to be understood is so automatic. A delayed reply from someone important can ruin your whole day. You replay your last message in your head and draft clarifications that no one even asked for. In that moment, the real threat isn't rejection, it's ambiguity. And explaining yourself feels like the only way to fix it. However, that is only going to expose you more. In lawsuits, divorces, and political rivalries, the party that talks the most first often believes they're controlling the narrative. Sometimes that works, but more often, they're just limiting their options. Each clarification reduces ambiguity. Each justification solidifies their motive, and each emotional slip-up provides the other side with leverage. Strategic ambiguity is a massive political asset. Here's the dilemma. The more desperately you need to be understood, the easier you are to understand. I started paying attention to who talks the most in meetings, not who has the best ideas or formally leads the meeting. What is their motive? To me, whoever dominates the air controls the situation. Interruptions reveal even more. Those lower in hierarchy tend to apologize for finishing their own sentences. Sorry, just one more point. That apology is not about politeness. It is about perceived rank. Over-justification is another signal. The intention was to appear fair. The effect was to expose limitations, and it signals neediness. There are studies behind this discomfort. Those secure in status monitor others less. Their language reflects it. Fewer disclaimers, fewer hedges, fewer defensive clarifications. Here is where Machiavelli becomes less caricature and more strategist. The powerful actor does not rush to justify policy. He announces it as necessity. The justification, if given, is minimal and framed as inevitability. The uncomfortable truth is that speech in hierarchical environments is rarely about content. It is about rank negotiation. Each sentence positions you relative to others. The question is not only what you said, it is how much you needed to say it. I am not arguing for muteness. I am noticing calibration. The individuals who hold durable authority tend to speak less frequently, but shape the frame within which others speak. They set the agenda. They summarize. They conclude. They do not scramble to fill silence. They allow others to reveal their priorities first. If every sentence reveals rank, then the real contest is not over ideas. It is over who must justify themselves and who never does. If every sentence reveals rank, then the most powerful move is not to speak, but to make others speak for you. Up to now, the danger was self-inflicted exposure. But exposure is rarely accidental from the other side. It can be engineered, not through overt pressure, through design. In reality, many phases rely on rapport building and controlled silence. The interrogator does not always demand information. He creates psychological discomfort and waits. The silence functions as a vacuum. Humans rush to fill vacuums. Strategic silence in corporate settings operates the same way. He created a pause. Mirroring intensifies this. This helps the client relax and share more. Encouraged venting is another underestimated tool, but venting also produces intelligence. False agreement works even more quietly. Meanwhile, I remain noncommittal. Feigned ignorance is perhaps the most tactic. Intelligence officers, drawing from declassified training manuals, have described techniques centered around cultivating curiosity rather than issuing direct challenges. This approach involves adopting a posture of seeking understanding, such as asking, "Help me understand how that would function." The intended recipient, experiencing a sense of intellectual superiority, is then inclined to elaborate on the subject matter. Research supports this dynamic. A 2009 study by Leonid Rosenblatt and Frank Keel on the illusion of explanatory depth indicated that individuals commonly overestimate their knowledge of intricate systems. When prompted to give detailed explanations, they start to expose gaps in their understanding and underlying assumptions. Since the invitation to explain feels like a compliment, the result often becomes a flow of disclosure. It was surprising to see how frequently perceived superiority can become a vulnerability. Individuals, when they feel more intelligent, knowledgeable, or experienced, tend to talk more freely. Within workplace structures, senior personnel sometimes confide in junior colleagues about strategic problems because they view them as unthreatening. In political interviews, experienced politicians occasionally reveal their long-term strategies to journalists whom they consider less experienced. This perceived difference in status diminishes their caution, providing the listener with an advantage. Niccolò Machiavelli put it with stark clarity: "A wise leader must make sure that others reveal their thoughts while he keeps his own hidden." This is not because hiding is admirable, but because control is determined by who has more information than the other. If I understand your reasons and you don't understand mine, I'm the one who gets to decide what happens next. Think about big mergers. In the early 2000s, many large tech company deals started with months of informal talks. Senior people invited their counterparts to private meals, company trips, and industry events. There were no serious talks, just friendly getting-to-know-you meetings. One side often talked about problems with mixing the two companies' disagreements inside their company, and who's going to take over when the boss left. The other side listened, asked neutral questions, and didn't promise anything. When official discussion started, the listening side had a good understanding of what the other side was worried about and what their deadlines were. For regular workers, this feels like slowly being exposed without realizing they're giving away important information. A boss sets up a relaxed meeting, asking, "How do you feel about the team?" Happy to be asked, the employee talks about tensions. Later, those tensions affect decisions about how the team is structured. The worker didn't mean to betray anyone, but they were part of a discussion where one side had more power from the beginning. The feeling of safety is what makes it all work. Copying someone's behavior makes them feel comfortable. Silence makes them feel like they need to fill the space. Curiosity makes them feel important. Fake agreement makes them feel like they are moving forward. None of these strategies seem aggressive. That is exactly what makes them so successful. Here, the reassuring concept of open communication begins to fall apart. Yes, talking can create trust, but talking when one side knows more than the other creates an edge. And that edge grows quietly. Information being unevenly distributed is not something that happens suddenly. It happens bit by bit. A small detail here, a complaint there, a future plan mentioned without thinking. Over time, one side sees the whole picture, while the other only sees what's right in front of them. And once you realize that some discussions aren't for sharing ideas, but for collecting them, a different question comes up. If someone is listening closely, nodding, encouraging you to talk more, are they really trying to understand you, or are they just making a list of everything you say? If some discussions are designed not to connect, but to make a list, then being honest isn't so innocent anymore. It becomes valuable, and valuable things can be used as weapons. We are taught a simple idea that seems unbreakable, telling the leads to doing what is right. People who report wrongdoing are seen as heroes. Being open is seen as a way to make things clean. Companies promise to be open. Politicians promise to be real. But when you look at what really happens to truth inside powerful groups, that idea starts to break down. Take the case of Sharon Watkins at Enron in 2001. She wrote a memo warning about problems with how the company was accounting for its money. Eventually, that truth destroyed the company. But right after she sent the memo, people inside the company carefully avoided talking about it. Information wasn't released all at once. It was planned, filtered, and changed. Those who controlled when information came out controlled the story. The release of information didn't just show corruption. It reshaped who had power. Or think about Edward Snowden in 2013. Some said his revealing secrets about government spying was brave, while others said it was a betrayal. No matter your politics, one thing is clear: revealing that information wasn't just about doing what was right. It was strategic. He chose which documents to release, which journalists to work with, and when to do it. Truth was released in a way that would have the most impact. Even whistleblowing, which is often seen as the purest form of honesty, is done with tactics in mind. Being completely honest can also be a form of aggression. In company culture over the last 10 years, especially in some tech companies that believed in radical honesty, workers were told to give unfiltered opinions. In theory, this makes people more responsible, but I have seen it used to show dominance. A boss gives very direct criticism in front of everyone, saying it's for the sake of being open. What they say might be true, but the way they say it shows who is in charge. The person being criticized can't easily argue back without looking weak or like they can't handle it. The truth becomes a way to show power. There are psychological reasons why this works. Research by Naomi Eisenberger in the early 2000s showed that social rejection triggers the same brain reactions as physical pain. Public criticism, even if it's true, makes people feel threatened. When someone uses honesty to make someone feel threatened, they are not just sharing information. They're changing their position in the group. Showing vulnerability in public is also tricky. In 2018, the CEO of a big tech company wrote a very personal letter about feeling burned out and unsure of himself. The media praised him for being real. Workers said they felt closer to their boss. The company's stock price stayed steady. I remember reading the letter and wondering, was this a real confession, or was it a way to protect his reputation? When vulnerability is shown on purpose, it can make leaders seem more human and stop people from criticizing them. It makes them seem relatable while still keeping control. Confessing can also prevent accusations. In strategies for dealing with crises, especially after company scandals in the 1980s and 90s, consultants started telling bosses to get ahead of the story. Admit small mistakes early. Say they were just isolated errors. By confessing only certain things, leaders limit what people investigate. The public feels like they're being open, but deeper problems stay hidden. The confession becomes a way to contain the damage. This is where things get morally complicated. Being open about only certain things isn't the same as lying, but it is a carefully chosen truth. Annual reports from companies about sustainability show how diverse they are, how much they donate to charity, and what their goals are for the environment. But they rarely talk about power struggles inside the company, projects that failed, or problems with how much executives are paid. What is shown looks good, but what is hidden is where the real power lies. Machiavelli saw this problem hundreds of years ago. He wrote that a leader must seem kind, trustworthy, humane, honest, and religious. Seem. The difference is important. Appearing virtuous keeps power stable. Being completely open makes it unstable. A leader who shows all his plans invites others to try to stop him. For regular people, this is confusing. A worker admits a mistake early, believing that honesty will protect them. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it becomes part of a file that affects decisions about promotions years later. A partner shares a past insecurity to get closer to their partner. Months later, that insecurity comes up during an argument, used as a sign of weakness. The original sharing was real, but how it was used later was strategic. Here, theories fail. Psychology at work encourages feeling safe. Couples therapy emphasizes being open. Ideas about democracy celebrate being transparent. None of these ideas are wrong, but they assume that everyone is acting in good faith. When good faith is not equal, truth becomes a tool to be used. Silence protects. It limits how much information is out there. Truth exposes. It makes the field of information bigger. But sometimes exposure is planned by those who know that people want to feel certain about what is right and wrong. Encourage someone to just be honest. Reward them for sharing. Then decide how that sharing will be used. I didn't expect how often honesty is less about being good and more about managing how you are seen. A politician admits to a small wrongdoing to seem responsible while distracting from bigger problems. A company releases some findings from an internal investigation before regulators demand to see everything. A colleague shares something vulnerable in a team meeting and gains respect that protects them from criticism later. Is honesty a virtue or a tactic? The question makes us uncomfortable because we want a clear answer. We want to believe that telling the exists outside of strategy. But in competitive situations, truth is part of strategy. And if appearing virtuous can be faked, if confessing can prevent attacks, if transparency can be selective, then the line between ethics and survival gets blurry. The one who speaks first might control the story. The one who speaks the most might get the most sympathy. But who controls how the truth is understood? Because once truth itself becomes the move in a game, silence isn't the only way to hide things anymore. Sometimes the best way to hide something is to reveal it, carefully measured, timed perfectly, and never complete. If truth can be timed and planned, then feelings are even more dangerous. Because feelings are hard to fake. They leak out. And when they leak out, they show not just what you are thinking, but what you care about most. For more than 20 years, neuroscience has made one uncomfortable point clear. In the mid-1990s, Joseph Ledoux's work on the amygdala showed how quickly emotions bypass slower thinking processes. We feel threatened before we even understand why. Later work by Matthew Lieberman and others showed that strong emotions reduce activity in the parts of the brain used for complex thought and controlling impulses. When we are angry, we think less clearly. When we are humiliated, we think even less clearly. In terms of power, unclear thinking is exposure. I once watched two founders negotiating the end of their partnership. The meeting started calmly, almost politely. But when one founder accused the other of mismanaging money, the accused founder exploded into a 10-minute rant. He listed the sacrifices he had made, the nights he had stayed up late, the private talks he had with investors. He thought he was defending his reputation, but he showed what hurt him most: his reputation, being recognized, his public image. The calmer founder barely said anything during the outburst. Days later, the terms of the final agreement targeted exactly those areas. Stock was negotiated in exchange for a public statement clearing his name. His anger had revealed his priorities. What we say when we are emotional is rarely random. It focuses on what matters to us. In 2011, research on hot cognition in decision-making showed that when we are emotionally charged, we pay more attention to information that is important to our goals. When someone lashes out in a meeting, what they say in their attack is valuable information. If they focus on credit is something that can be used against them. If they focus on fairness is something that can be used against them. Angry emails are a quieter, but equally telling example. Companies keep them for a reason. In several big workplace lawsuits in the early 2000s, internal emails full of sarcasm and frustration became important evidence. Not because they contained strategic secrets, but because they showed priorities and animosities. Once written, that emotion becomes permanent. I have seen mid-level managers ruin years of being seen as neutral with one late-night message. After being criticized by a boss, they replied defensively, copying many people, detailing complaints they had never voiced before. By the morning, the emotional release feels justified. Weeks later, it feels like a mistake. The company now has a record of their resentments. Public anger shows this pattern on a larger scale. Social media sites spread emotional expression through algorithms. Studies by researchers at New York University in 2020 found that posts expressing moral anger were more likely to be shared. Outrage feels powerful because it quickly brings allies together, but it also publicly commits you to a position. It limits your ability to maneuver later. Politicians who tweet impulsively during crises often find themselves trapped by their own words when negotiations require them to be flexible. Behavior in court offers another example. Trial consultants have long advised defendants to stay calm, no matter what. Jurors see visible anger as a loss of control. In contrast, the calm person seems believable, even when the evidence is equal on both sides. In big trials in the 1990s and early 2000s, media analysts often pointed out how composure affected public perception more than complicated legal arguments. The person who can control their emotions seems stronger. I didn't expect how much advantage comes not from winning arguments, but from simply enduring them. The calm opponent often does not beat you with logic. They wait. They let you get more and more upset. They let you show what matters to you. Then they respond minimally, sometimes hours or days later, when your emotional energy has already shown its limits. Sarcasm works in a similar way. It pretends to be witty, but it shows contempt. In understanding how people negotiate, contempt is one of the quickest ways to show that a relationship is not important to you. Once that is understood, the other side changes its strategy. If you show that maintaining the relationship matters less than showing that you are superior, you have given away your calculation. Machiavelli's warning was not mysterious, but mechanical. A leader who cannot control himself will be controlled by others. Control yourself or be controlled. Emotional speech is not weakness in a moral sense. It is weakness in terms of information. It broadcasts urgency. For regular workers, this is not just a theory. It is the moment when a team member explodes in frustration during a performance review and later realizes that everything they said is now part of how leadership sees them. It is the partner who shouts during an argument and later realizes that the quiet response was not forgiveness, but a recalculation. It is the public figure who reacts instantly to criticism and finds that that reaction becomes the headline. Emotion narrows thought. Narrowed thought narrows language. Narrowed language exposes a hierarchy of needs. And once your hierarchy of needs is visible, it can be negotiated against. The dichotomy is stark. We celebrate fervent expression and extol the virtue of genuineness. Society urges, share your truth. Yet, in environments defined by competition, those who react with haste often relinquish their strategic advantage. This creates a challenging paradox. If the control of emotions is key to maintaining power, what becomes of those who cannot manage to do so? Who stands to gain most in situations where self-control is valued and emotional responses are treated as a resource to be exploited? If composure allows for leverage, then silence isn't about absence. It's a strategic construct. What may appear as simple withdrawal often has a deliberate purpose. My deeper observations of high-stakes negotiations and elite settings have revealed that silence is far from a passive act. It's a carefully planned tactic. Consider declassified transcripts from the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which show moments when leaders intentionally delayed responses. Messages were drafted, revised, and sometimes held back for hours. These delays weren't due to indecision, but rather a calculated strategy to prevent hasty escalation by avoiding immediate reactions. Silence served to slow things down, and tempo is a source of control. Parallel patterns emerge in less dramatic corporate negotiations. Back in 2014, there was a major pharmaceutical merger that got a lot of news coverage. In this situation, one party repeatedly put off making any official comments on rumors about how much the company was worth. Experts made guesses, and share prices jumped around. Inside the company, higher-ups waited and watched. That calculated pause led to a shortage of verified information. This shortage, in turn, intensified interest. Then increased attention made everyone think the situation was really important. When a statement was finally made, people had moved past questions like, can this deal even work? And were more concerned with, when will it be finalized? The strategic silence had influenced expectations from the very start. Silence controls how the situation is seen, as it avoids confirming the other party's point of view. When lawyers are questioning someone in court, the smart ones often tell their clients to only answer the exact question asked and don't say anything else. It's not that saying more is a bad thing. It's just that extra details can give the other lawyers something to use against you. In some highly publicized court cases from the early 2000s, some people gave really short and careful answers and were able to dodge tricky questions when others got caught up in long explanations. The juries didn't necessarily feel warmer towards these people who stayed quiet, but they did see them as more believable. I hadn't considered just how much silence can affect someone physically. In negotiation training sessions inspired by William Urie's and Chris Voss's ideas, people learn to make an offer and then zip their lips. No reasons given, no quick apologies. Very often, the other person will start talking themselves into a deal within moments. The quiet makes them uneasy, so they start suggesting changes without being asked. The silence then becomes a source of concern for them. People in high positions do this without even thinking about it. Just watch how judges pause before they announce a decision. That pause is almost always on purpose. It shows they've thought carefully, and it highlights importance. It stops people from interrupting and quietly emphasizes who's in charge. In meetings of company directors, leaders often wait a few seconds after someone makes a suggestion before saying anything. This achieves three things. It allows them to control their own reaction. It sends the signal that the suggestion is being taken seriously, and it makes the person who made the suggestion want to explain it more clearly. Most people are afraid of being disconnected from others. This fear usually makes them speak too soon. Back in 1975, a researcher named Erwin Altman came up with a theory that close relationships get closer when people gradually reveal things about themselves to each other. When silence gets in the way of that sharing, it causes worry. I've noticed junior employees quickly jump into talk when they're getting a performance review. If the manager says, "I'm thinking," the employee takes it as a bad sign and starts trying to defend themselves, explain things, and offer to do more. The manager didn't ask for more, but the silence brought it out. Silence also causes people to project things. In studies about how well people deal with unclear social situations, done in the 1990s, it was found that people often see their own worries and expectations in the person who is staying quiet. If you think you messed up, a neutral look on someone's face can feel like they're judging you. If you feel like you're not valued, a delayed response can feel the same as being turned down. The person who is silent becomes like a blank screen. Projection can expose vulnerabilities by revealing internal thoughts. For example, someone who assumes, "I guess you're mad at me," without evidence has shown their insecurity. A negotiator who adds, "I already know this offer is too low," has weakened their stance before negotiations even begin. Silence didn't do anything on its own. It just opened the door for imagination. In elite circles, these behaviors often become standard practice. For instance, some private equity and law firms organize meetings so that the most senior person speaks last. This forces everyone else to lay out their positions first. By the time the senior person speaks, all opposing opinions have been made public. The senior person then adjusts their comments to align with what appears to be the strongest viewpoint. Speaking last isn't about showing off. It's about the strategic use of information. Machiavelli had a natural understanding of how to strategically order information. He advised rulers to keep their intentions hidden, only revealing decisions when necessary. Silence keeps options open. As soon as you commit to a position or plan, you limit your future actions. Until you do so, you can watch and observe. For regular folks like you and me, being quiet for strategic reasons can feel risky. If you don't reply instantly to a partner's message, will they think you're ignoring them? When there is a heated argument, will you look weak if you don't make your position crystal clear? The worry is about being excluded from the group. But there's also a conflicting idea. The person who can handle being unclear about things for a while often has a structural edge over someone who is always trying to smooth things over quickly. Silence helps keep emotions in check. It limits how much information is shared. It creates a shortage. It encourages projection. None of these effects require being forceful. They just require patience. We also need to face the hard truth that patience isn't something everyone has equally. People with higher status can afford to stay quiet for longer because their position is more secure. People with lower status feel they have to reassure others explain things, and keep connections strong. That means silence itself can become a marker of where someone stands in the system. You start seeing the method once you know what to look for. Who jumps to answer right away? Who waits? Who explains everything? Who watches? Who feels the pressure when things go quiet? And who is creating that pressure? Silence creates projection. Projection creates vulnerability. And vulnerability, once identified, turns into something that can be negotiated. This brings up a deeper concern. We now know that silence is power. So, in systems where only some people are allowed to be silent, while everyone else is forced to constantly justify themselves, what happens? If silence becomes a sign of where you stand, then a lack of transparency isn't just a glitch, it's how the system is designed to work. Modern organizations talk about the importance of transparency almost as if it's a religion. They produce annual reports, hold press conferences, create public dashboards, and publish corporate statements that are all about openness. Governments pass laws that encourage you to ask for all kinds of information. Tech companies publish transparency reports listing data requests from governments. The message is clear. If you can see everything, you could trust us. However, when you follow the important decisions being made, you see the supposed transparency quickly fade away when power is at play. Take how corporations are managed as an example. Public companies in America have to legally share important information with their shareholders. But they keep their plans secret, like who they might buy, how they're going to change pricing, or how they're going to restructure internally, until the very last minute. Back in 2012, when Facebook was getting ready to launch its initial public offering, its S-1 filing included lots of details about possible risks and how they made money. But inside the company, meetings and discussions about how to make money from mobile users were kept quiet until market reactions forced them to adjust. Shareholders got data, but the top executives had all the power to decide what to do. The layers of information people receive mimic the power structures. Board members get more information than regular employees. Top executives get more than the managers who work for them. Managers get more than their staff. This isn't random. It protects those at the top by giving them flexibility. I used to think that corporations were being two-faced, preaching transparency but secretly doing the opposite. But in intelligence agencies, being secretive is the standard, not something to hide. It's built into how they work. After the attacks on September 11th, official investigations showed how information was kept separate between different agencies. The changes made after that didn't get rid of the secrecy, they just rearranged it. So some people at the top had access to more information, but it wasn't shared with everyone. Total transparency was never seen as a practical goal, but controlling who saw what was. The fewer people who are aware of your plans, the harder it is for them to manipulate you. Experts agree on this point. Studies on strategic disclosure in bargaining, some of which was done by Lee Thompson in the 1990s, show that negotiators who reveal what their priorities are but keep their limits secret do better than those who reveal everything. Partial transparency leads to more cooperation while also keeping control. Full transparency gets rid of control. Political systems work the same way. Politicians talk a lot about being open, but diplomatic talks happen behind closed doors. Way back in the early 1990s, the Oslo Accords were secretly negotiated in Norway before they were announced to the world. If those talks had happened on live television, every compromise would have caused an immediate public outcry. Secrecy kept fragile compromises safe from emotional reactions. Media strategy ties everything together. Leaders today are constantly under the spotlight. Every statement is recorded, shared, and used as a weapon, so it makes sense to carefully control the message. Spokespersons repeat certain phrases and avoid questions. "We cannot comment at this time." This isn't just avoiding the issue. It's narrative control. I was surprised to discover that this kind of control earns rewards. When something bad happened with Tylenol in 1982, Johnson & Johnson's leadership is often praised for being transparent. They did communicate quickly, but even in that famous case, the details of the internal investigation were carefully managed. Public messaging was clear and reassuring, but the actual operational strategies were kept private. The company was only transparent to a degree. For the average worker, this feels a bit different and more like being left out. People read emails about how their company is striving for radical openness, but then find out about layoffs from rumors before getting official confirmation. Mid-level managers are told to cascade information, but are given scripts instead of the underlying facts. The idea of transparency sets expectations that the structure can't live up to. Here, the conflict between the dream of transparency and how things really are becomes clear. Transparency builds trust, yet holding things back preserves flexibility. Organizations attempt to get the best from both worlds. Machiavelli wouldn't find this surprising. Rulers, he said, need to appear good while being ready to deceive when necessary. Control the narrative, hide your real reasons, and only reveal what you have to. This is not to be cruel, but to avoid being trapped. This carefully chosen way of revealing things is simply silence on a grand scale. On a personal level, holding back protects your advantage. On a system-wide level, carefully controlling information flow keeps the hierarchy stable. However, there's a price to be paid. When being secretive becomes a habit, trust disappears. When transparency is promised but never delivered, people become cynical. Workers lose interest. People begin to suspect they're being manipulated, even when it's not happening. The system then tries to fix this with even more messaging, more obvious transparency, and more carefully chosen disclosures. Then the system becomes more complicated. So the question is no longer whether a lack of transparency exists. The real question is, why do we continue to ask for transparency from organizations that depend on limiting it to survive? And why do those who climb the ranks in these organizations quickly learn that visibility is for showing off, not for making strategy? If power rewards a lack of transparency, what does that mean for people who have been taught that honesty and openly sharing everything are morally right? If organizations stay alive by limiting what they reveal, then the person who speaks freely isn't just honest. They're at a structural disadvantage. I didn't want to boil everything down to a simple formula. People are messy, and they don't always follow the rules. Context changes things. Still, I keep seeing the same pattern over and over again in experiments, negotiations, courtrooms, corporate crises, and personal relationships. It's not magic, but rather a set of procedures. Speech reveals why you're doing what you're doing. This isn't just philosophy, it's a basic part of how our minds work. In 2006, researchers at Tufts University showed just how quickly listeners infer goals from only a few words. Even small changes in how something was phrased allowed people to guess what someone wanted with surprising accuracy. The brain is designed to predict things. When you give it language, it figures out motive. Once intention is understood, you can predict what will happen next. In a negotiation study by Adam Galinsky and his colleagues in the early 2000s, People who openly shared what was important to them early on were more likely to be strategically countered. Those on the other side tweaked their offers to take advantage of these preferences. So, yes, cooperation increased, but so did the chances of being tactically exploited. While theory promises that everyone will benefit, in competitive situations, being open becomes like giving your opponent a map of what matters to you. Being predictable reduces your leverage. During labor disputes in the 1970s and 80s, union negotiators were specifically taught not to reveal the point at which they would actually strike. The moment the management accurately guessed the lowest acceptable offer, the bargaining zone shrank. When your absolute limit is known, it becomes the most you can hope to get. When you have less leverage, others have more control. Behavioral economists call it anchoring, while strategists call it containment. In courtrooms, experienced litigators don't just impulsively object. They wait. They let the opposing lawyer show their line of reasoning. Every unnecessary piece of clarification is information. Every emotional outburst shows what the person really cares about. I've seen court records where a single comment made out of frustration allowed the cross-examination to completely shift, trapping the speaker in their own words. The formula becomes stricter. Speech reveals intention. Intention makes you predictable. Being predictable reduces your leverage. When you have less leverage, others have more control. The opposite of this is less obvious because it feels like you're not doing anything. Silence keeps things unclear. Not being clear prevents precise calculations. In 1971, the Pentagon Papers exposed classified information about the Vietnam War. The shocking part wasn't just the content, but also how the carefully managed ambiguity suddenly disappeared. For years, officials were able to subtly shift the narrative. Once the internal assessments were revealed, the government had far less room to move. Ambiguity had been used as a kind of political capital. When things are uncertain, it creates the impression of power. Social psychology has confirmed this over and over. Studies on scarcity and uncertainty show that little information makes something seem more valuable. In organizations, executives who don't speak much are often thought to be more strategic than those who share every thought. I wasn't expecting how automatic this assumption is. Silence is interpreted as thought, even when it's just restraint. Popular culture often tells us the opposite. Charismatic speakers win elections. Inspirational founders command the stage. Being authentic builds brands. There is truth to that. Steve Jobs revealed his products with great clarity and drama. Barack Obama's speeches motivated millions of people. But if you look closely, even the most celebrated communicators are careful about what they share. Product roadmaps are guarded. Political negotiations happen in secret, and public eloquence exists alongside private ambiguity. This sharpens the internal conflict. Expressing yourself immediately can feel good. Neuroscience backs this up. In studies at the University of California, when people shared personal frustrations, there was increased brain activity in the reward circuits associated with dopamine. Talking relieves stress. It lowers cortisol. It creates a feeling of connection. Your nervous system rewards you for speaking. The system you're a part of does not reward relief. It values calculation. I've seen very capable employees hurt themselves not through a lack of ability, but through unnecessary comments, such as an angry email sent at 11 p.m., a defensive explanation during a performance review, or a sarcastic remark in a meeting that reveals they are insecure about their position. None of these were inherently wrong. They all revealed what mattered most to the person. And as soon as that's visible, it can be used against them. Your mouth isn't your enemy because speaking is bad. It's your enemy because it's impulsive in a world that rewards calculation. At the same time, silence isn't about being paranoid or withdrawing from the world. It's about pacing yourself. People with high status pause before answering, not because they can't think of anything to say, but because that delay disrupts predictions. It forces others to rethink their strategy. In intelligence interviews, trained operatives let long spaces of silence stretch out. The discomfort makes the other person want to fill the space, often with additional details. Silence becomes a way to get information without making accusations. Speech is a currency. It goes around. It buys connection, trust, and belonging. But once it's spent, you can't get it back. Silence is like capital. It builds up. It creates options. It allows you to act without being preempted. Of course, the danger is that you could become cynical. If everyone holds back, systems stop working. If no one speaks up, injustice hardens. I'm not suggesting we should all become mute. I'm pointing out an imbalance. Those who speak impulsively are easier to understand. Those who reveal the least are harder to corner. So power doesn't always go to those who talk best. More often, it goes to those who reveal the least. And if that's true, the troubling question we need to face isn't whether we should speak, but when. We also need to think about how doing so will affect our leverage, our sense of self, and the systems that are quietly studying us every time we open our mouths.